Among the Tuareg and many people of the Sahelian region of Africa, tea is more than a beverage. It is a way of life. But how did this come to be? And what has it got to do with the legendary lost oasis of war in Tuareg folklore? Listen on for some Tuareg tea folklore and more. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Mythological Africans podcast, where we read and talk about stories from African mythology and folklore. I am your host, Helen Tunde. Hello again, friends. So, if you read the MA newsletter from May, then you might recall that I had a little bit of an existential crisis about what we will talk about in June. And the options came down to continuing our exposition of folklore in modern African literature or looking at food related folklore. And I thought about it some more and decided, well, why not get the best of both worlds, at least for today? And that is why we'll be talking about tea related folklore in Abraham Alcone's Almages or The Animist. This book is rightfully called a work of epic literature of the Tuareg people, and it is an account of the various micro and macro level dramas which spiral out of the Tuareg people's historic entanglements with Islamic and traditional African cultures. The author entwines Tuareg folklore into the narrative at every turn, and this transformed what could have been a cumbersome, kind of dry, boring story of the convoluted political, economic, and religious scheming that goes into any people's history into an absorbing account of the struggles and the philosophies of one of Africa's most iconic people. Alcone is himself a Tuareg man, and you can tell from his writing that he knows and just absolutely loves his people. There is a sense of decided pride with which he talks about their cultures and customs. And this comes through especially clearly when he relates a folkloric account to explain the philosophical or cultural foundation of some practice or way of being. And this brings us to the topic of tea making and drinking. Now, I'll admit, tea is not one of the first things that comes to mind when I think of desert dwelling Tuareg people. So I was immediately intrigued when in chapter 1 of the book's second part, and this chapter is titled The Nipple of the Earth in reference to the wells of the desert, a character refuses to accept an offering of green tea, and this causes so much suspicion among the people. They brand him a jinn, right, a spirit, because as they believed, no one in the whole great desert had heard of a desert dweller who did not drink green tea, the drink of paradise which came to the people from the promised wow. And if you don't know what wow is, you should listen to last week's episode. So, as I came to find out, tea making and drinking among the Tuareg is an important and one might even say load bearing cultural practice. And this is best expressed in this Tuareg poem. Treating a stranger well means sitting them down on a rug, speaking to them courteously like a nobleman, and offering them sweet tea in a golden cup. In Tuareg legend, tea or ate, which is almost certainly a transliteration of the word tea, came to the Tuareg through their first ancestor who brought the leaves from the lost paradise of Wa and gave it to his descendants as an amulet against the hardships of desert living. As the author describes it, for the Tuareg, green tea is relief from the sufferings of travel and work. It cures headaches, soothes fevers, and chills. It washes away cares and pains and fills the soul with delight and ecstasy. A lost traveler could smell its fragrance from a day and a half away and follow the smell to a campsite where there would be relief from thirst and death. Tea making and sharing among the Tuareg is a ritual art, and it comes with great depth in its enactment. Algerian scholar Ali Ben Cherif Abdelillah states in a paper about tea making customs in the Sahara that the process of people coming together to make and share tea facilitates social relations, much in the same way kola nuts with palm wine or millet, sorghum, corn, or honey beer does in other parts of the continent. The Tuareg drink copious amounts of tea, 5 to 7 times a day by some accounts, and each time is a three-part ceremony. This ceremony is called the ceremony of the three teas. The first part, Tuareg people call it the tea of death, involves a cup of tea which is brewed bitter and strong and served hot with a little bit of sugar. It's difficult to swallow and really palatable only to those who are used to it. It's not served to children. Among some Tuareg people, this first glass is medicine against fatigue, meant to awaken and sharpen the senses. The second part involves tea which is sweetened with sugar and served at a more pleasant temperature. Here it is likened to the ephemeral pleasure aroused by the first kiss, so it's called the tea of love. In the third part of the ceremony, the tea is brewed light and heavily sweetened, so it carries only a memory of the tea's bitter taste and flavored with mint, herbs, spices, and flowers. And this third serving of tea is called the tea of friendship. And according to a Tuareg saying, the first pot of tea is bitter like life, the second is bittersweet like love, and the third is mild like death. Most households have a tea making tray with tea making equipment like glasses and teapots and sugar shears and bags of tea and mint leaves. And traditionally, owning beautiful tea making equipment is a point of pride. And in the episode notes, you can see a picture of some of the elegantly crafted shears which were used to break the large, densely cast cones of sugar, which is how it was sold back in the day. And you will also see some images of Tuareg pewter teapots, which are in their own class of exquisite objects of African craftsmanship. Among the Algerian Tuareg, tea ceremonies are an important part of gatherings of the Jama, and that is the community. And the person who makes the tea is called the Al Gayem. And this person is usually a man, but can also be a woman. And either way, they are a respected elder in the household or the community. And they are known for their skill with tea making and for their eloquence, because as part of the master or mistress of the tea ceremony, they will not only make and serve the tea and speak the ceremonial words to move the process along, they also guide the conversations which unfold as the tea is served and drunk. The tea making process itself involves specific movements which ensure the tea comes out looking and tasting as it should. And the pleasure of watching these preparations and savoring the drink is part of the communal aspect of the three tea ceremony. And additionally, pouring tea slowly with a steady hand so it forms a layer of foam at the glass's rim is considered a nobleman's skill, which, along with finely made equipment and their wealth, is, showing their capacity to gather wealth and keep things in order. In these ceremonies, the tea is served following specific rules that adhere to social codes. For example, the Algayem must serve the same amount of tea to everyone present, must serve the person to their right, and must wash the equipment with hot water after each preparation. Participants on their part can only start drinking with the blessing of the Algayem, and they can only use additional sugar if allowed by the Algayem, and the amount of sugar must be approved by all those present. Conversation during these ceremonies is courteous and respectful, and no one is allowed to stop the ceremony once it starts. And so, through these elaborate tea making and sharing ceremonies, the Algayem creates an environment in which the Jama, the community, can comfortably discuss important issues, all while enforcing etiquette rules which keep things courteous. And you can imagine being courteous and understanding and avoiding hostility is extremely important to people who depend on each other to survive in the desert. So traditionally, who you drink tea with, if you're a Tuareg person, is a marker of social status. So usually people of noble class drink together and people of the servant classes drink together. However, sugar and tea is one of the many gifts that people of the wealthy and noble classes were expected to give their smiths and other people in the servant classes. There's actually a folk tale of a rich noblewoman who complained to her husband that the servants were being too demanding. And so they refused to give them gifts of tea, sugar, and other things. And so they abandoned them. And then these rich people were found with no one to make their mats, no one to make equipment for them, jewelry and cutlery and all of that stuff. Interestingly, though, despite its legendary nature, tea, and specifically the gunpowder tea, which is a type of Chinese green tea, is quite the recent introduction to Tuareg culture. It arrived in the 19th century with British merchant vessels trading at Moroccan ports. And then during the Crimean Wars of 1853 to 1856, the British, who had lost access to the markets of Central Europe, turned their attention and efforts to sell their stocks of tea to Northern Africa using a network of Moroccan and Jewish traders. And just as it did in Europe after arriving from China in the 1600s, tea just soaked itself in the culture of Northern African people and brought with it, trade not only in the tea leaves, but in sugar and tea making equipment. And Tuareg tea drinking has in turn captured the sensibilities of people in the countries that they live, Mali and Niger and those Sahelian countries. And I was just tickled pink to find out that in Niger, young men form tea drinking conversations group called Fada, which are open to all who come in friendship. So we'll stop here for today, but if you want to know more, there are links to several papers and essays in the episode notes. In one paper, there is a discussion of the etymology of the word tea from Mandarin through European languages all the way to both the Tuareg and the Bamana languages, as well as modern Ivorian parlance. At least one of these papers is in French, but it's a quick read, only about 10 pages long, and Google Translate will get you where you need to go. So we'll be back next week with more African folklore. But before I go, I have to mention the African Folklore Restoration Initiative, AFRI. And this is a mythological Africans grant which is available to unpublished African writers aged 55 years and older. Each recipient will be provided with a grant of up to $300 to review and update or rewrite 2 to 3 folk tales from their people. And the hope is that these will be published in an anthology. So I'm really excited about this project and the opportunity to support older African writers who, as you well know, tend not to get a lot of opportunities in the current climate. So if you are eligible or if you know someone who is, please click the link in the episode notes to learn more. So thank you all again for listening, and we'll see you next week.